They say nothing ever happens in small towns, that behind those white picket fences and friendly waves, life moves at a peaceful pace where the biggest scandal is who's dating whom. And the most dangerous thing you'll encounter is a traffic jam at the local diner. Tonight, we're going to shatter that illusion completely. What you're about to hear are 11 documented cases that will make you question everything you thought you knew about quiet communities across America. So dim the lights, lock your doors, and prepare yourself for 11 true tales that will forever change how you see those peaceful small towns you drive through. Because after tonight, you'll know the terrifying truth. The quieter the town, the louder the screams that echo in its shadows. This is verified fears, and viewer discretion is strongly advised. Let's move to our first story. Millbrook, Vermont wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to make the news. Tucked away in the Green Mountains, it was one of those postcard towns with a single blinking traffic light, a family-owned diner, and a white steepled church that rang its bells every Sunday morning. In autumn, tourists would flood in for cider donuts and foliage drives. In winter, the snow buried the town in soft silence. That's what drew Elena Marsh, 28, a soft-spoken librarian who had recently escaped a messy breakup in Boston. After years of city noise and sleepless nights, she was craving the calm of small-town life. When the library board offered her a live-in position, an apartment above the historic Millbrook Public Library, she packed her car and never looked back. The apartment was charming in a way only old New England buildings could be. Sloped ceilings, antique brass fixtures, and floorboards that sang under every step. She decorated it with second-hand furniture, shelves of books, and a fat ginger cat named Oliver who seemed just as relieved to be away from city chaos. Her days settled into a soothing rhythm. Mornings were spent shelving books, afternoons leading children's story time, evenings reading by the window with a steaming mug of tea. Millbrook embraced her quickly. The older ladies at the bakery would slip her free scones. The sheriff nodded when she passed him at the general store. Life was peaceful, exactly what she wanted. But that peace would not last. It started with a sound. One night in early October, Elena was lying in bed with Oliver at her feet, drifting off to the whisper of autumn rain against the windows. Then came a sharp creak overhead, different from the usual groans of an old building. She froze, straining her ears. Another creak. The sound came from the attic. She tried to laugh it off. This was an old library built in the late 1800s. Of course, the roof shifted in storms, but Oliver's sudden growl made her uneasy. He sat rigid, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The next morning, she told herself it was nothing, but as the days passed, small things began to bother her. Her favorite mug, always placed on the same hook, was sitting in the sink. A sweater she'd left folded on a chair was draped over the couch. Once, she swore she locked the front door, but found it ajar when she came home. She mentioned it to Sheriff Paul Harker when he stopped by the library to renew his fishing license. The sheriff, a man in his 50s with a salt and pepper beard and a calm demeanor, chuckled kindly. "Old buildings settle, Miss Marsh. Could be a raccoon. I'll send someone by to check the attic." A deputy came later that day, poked around the dusty space above her apartment and left shaking his head. "No sign of critters," he'd said. "Probably just the wind." Elena tried to believe him. The noises grew bolder. What started as creaks became soft footsteps measured, careful steps that seemed to follow her from room to room. Sometimes, late at night, she swore she heard faint breathing through the air vents. One evening after closing, she stayed late to reorganize the mystery section. Around 10 p.m., she heard something that froze her blood, a soft thump from directly above. She grabbed a flashlight and climbed the narrow staircase to the attic. The air smelled of dust and cedar. Her beam illuminated boxes of old books, Christmas decorations, and furniture covered in sheets. Nothing seemed out of place, but as she turned to leave, she spotted something odd, a small pile of apple cores near the back wall. She hadn't eaten apples up here. The next day, she confided in Marianne, a 70-year-old regular who treated the library as her second home. Marianne leaned inconspiratorially. "Sounds like you've got yourself a watcher," she whispered. "A watcher?" Alina asked, amused. Marianne nodded solemnly. Back in the 70s, a family down on Pine Street found a drifter living in their attic for months. Folks say he watched them every night while they slept. "That's why I lock my attic door." Alina laughed it off, but a chill ran down her spine. That night, she double-checked every lock, slid a chair under her bedroom doorknob, and curled up in bed clutching her phone. Oliver growled again at the ceiling. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. It was a rainy Friday night, and Alina was in bed reading when she sensed movement in the doorway. She glanced up and froze. A man stood there, silhouetted by the dim hallway light. Her heart stopped. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he darted back into the shadows. Alina screamed, scrambling for her phone. 911, what's your emergency? There's a man in my apartment, she cried. The sheriff and 2 deputies arrived within minutes. They searched every inch of the apartment, the library below, and the attic. Nothing. No forced entry, no intruder. One deputy suggested she might have dreamed it. But the next day, she found something chilling. Her front door security camera showed a blurry figure slipping inside while she was at work. Sheriff Harker returned with a more serious tone. They dusted for fingerprints, set up a motion sensor, and advised her to stay with a friend. But Alina refused. This was her home. She wasn't going to be chased out. She began sleeping with the lights on. A week later, everything came to light. Sheriff Harker stopped by unannounced, holding a warrant. "We're searching that attic again," he said firmly. This time they didn't just glance around. They moved boxes, lifted tarps, and checked every crawl space. In a far corner, hidden behind a wall of old shelving, they found it, a makeshift nest. There was a thin mattress, a sleeping bag, and piles of food wrappers. Crumpled drawings littered the floor, sketches of Alina sleeping in her bed, her apartment drawn from above. The sheriff's face hardened. "He's been up here for weeks," he muttered. A trapdoor near the eaves showed how he'd slipped in, an old maintenance hatch that opened onto the roof. From there, he could climb down the fire escape and vanish. Forensic techs collected everything. Alina stood in shock, clutching Oliver as cameras flashed. Reporters began circling town. The man was arrested 2 days later. His name was Daniel Cross, 34, a drifter with a history of breaking and entering. He claimed he liked watching people live normal lives. Alina tried to move on. The apartment was clean, locks replaced. The sheriff assured her it was safe, but safety was an illusion. One evening, she came home from a library board meeting and noticed something odd. The attic door, freshly locked that morning, hung open. Her blood ran cold. She grabbed her phone and called the sheriff, but before she could speak, she heard footsteps above her. She fled outside just as a shadow moved past her living room window. Deputies stormed in. Cross had escaped custody that afternoon during a transport errand. He'd come straight back. The chase ended in the children's reading section of the library, where officers tackled him among scattered picture books. This time, he was sent to a maximum security facility. The incident rattled Millbrook. Locals who never locked their doors started installing cameras. The library board sealed the attic permanently and offered Alina a new apartment in a safer building. She accepted, though the trauma lingered. Nights were the hardest. She'd wake at 3 a.m., convinced she heard footsteps. Oliver slept on her pillow, always alert. The story made regional headlines. The Watcher in the rafters. Journalists descended on the tiny town, turning her nightmare into a cautionary tale about complacency and safety. Months later, Alina moved again, this time far away. She left Vermont quietly without saying goodbye. The apartment above the library was renovated and rented to a young couple who painted over the scars on the attic floor. But some scars never fade. Let's move to our second story. Grain silos towered over the flat fields of Maple Hollow, Iowa. A farming town so small it didn't appear on most maps. Just under 800 residents, 2 churches, and a gas station that doubled as a diner. Neighbors waved to each other at every stop sign. It was late October 1994, harvest season. The Miller family, David, a grain elevator foreman, his wife, Carol, and their 2 kids, Emily 10 and Jacob 7, lived in a modest farmhouse on the edge of town. They weren't wealthy, but they were well loved. Carol was known for her apple pies, and David often helped neighbors fix tractors. On the night of October 22, the sun dipped below the cornfields, painting the sky orange. Inside the Miller home, the smell of roast chicken filled the air. Carol had set the dining table, plates, silverware, and a steaming pot of mashed potatoes. Emily's homework lay neatly stacked on the counter. It was an ordinary Saturday night until it wasn't. The next morning, a friend stopped by to borrow a canning jar. She knocked. No answer. The Miller's pickup truck sat in the driveway, keys on the hook inside the window. She tried the door. It was locked. She peered through the kitchen window and froze. The table was still set, dinner plates untouched, drinks half full. The roast chicken sat in its pan, congealed fat glistening in the morning sun. It looked as if the family had simply gotten up mid-meal and vanished. Sheriff's deputies arrived quickly. They found the house meticulously clean with no signs of struggle. The front and back doors were locked from the inside. Windows were latched. Upstairs, the beds were unmade, pajamas still folded neatly. Emily's favorite stuffed rabbit was on her pillow. Jacob's school backpack sat by his desk. Carol's purse and ID were in the living room. David's wallet, still full of cash, rested on the nightstand. The only oddity, a single muddy boot print by the back door. The sheriff of Maple Hollow, Tom Greaves, had been with the department for 20 years but had never seen anything like it. The small police force called in the Iowa State Patrol and the FBI within 48 hours. News spread quickly. Volunteers combed the cornfields, helicopters scanned from above, and divers searched a nearby pond. Nothing. Phone records showed no unusual calls. Bank accounts were untouched. There were no ransom notes, no threats. Neighbors insisted the Millers were a loving, stable family. David wasn't in debt. Carol wasn't having an affair. Emily was shy but happy. Jacob loved baseball. Nothing about their lives suggested danger. The mystery deepened when investigators examined the house closely. The locked doors puzzled them. The only spare key was hidden under a ceramic frog on the porch, a detail known only to close friends and family. In a town as small as Maple Hollow, Rumors spread faster than corn pollen. Some whispered that David had enemies at work. Others claimed to have seen strange cars lurking near the farmhouse. A few leaned into the supernatural. Maybe they were raptured, an elderly churchgoer murmured. Investigators pursued every angle. Robbery gone wrong, dismissed. Nothing valuable was missing. Voluntary disappearance, unlikely. Why leave dinner cooking and valuables behind? Abduction. The locked doors made this complicated, unless the abductor was someone they trusted. The muddy boot print became a focal point. Lab analysis revealed it belonged to a rare brand sold only in 3 stores across Iowa. Investigators canvassed every farm supply shop in the region. Weeks passed. The trail grew cold. Nearly 2 months later, a hunter exploring abandoned barns stumbled across something chilling. A woman's scarf snagged on a rusted nail, stained with blood. The scarf matched one Carol had been wearing in a family photo. The barn was 10 miles from the Miller home, deep in the woods. Inside, officers found a small cot, canned food, and children's drawings taped to the wall, drawings signed Emily. Hope surged, but when cadaver dogs searched the nearby creek, they alerted. Divers recovered a muddy shoe belonging to Jacob. The FBI escalated involvement. Agents believed the family had been held captive for days before disappearing completely. Satellite imagery from that October weekend was inconclusive, and the barn offered no fingerprints. Whoever did this knew how to cover their tracks. Attention turned to Rick Hanley, a farmhand with a criminal record for burglary. He'd been fired from David's grain elevator job months earlier. When questioned, Rick seemed evasive, but there was no physical evidence tying him to the Millers. Another lead came from a truck driver who reported seeing a woman and 2 children resembling Carol, Emily, and Jacob at a gas station near the Missouri border. Surveillance footage showed a man with them, face obscured by a baseball cap. Investigators followed this lead for months, crossing state lines, but it evaporated into dead ends. The Miller home became a grim monument. For years, the property stood vacant. Reporters occasionally returned to film documentaries, capturing shots of the dining table frozen in time, dinner plates gathering dust. Some locals swore they saw lights flicker in the house at night or curtains move. Teens dared each other to break in, only to run screaming at the eeriness of the untouched meal. The family's relatives held vigils every October, leaving candles on the front porch. Carol's sister told reporters, "We just want answers. We don't care about punishment. We just need to know what happened." In 2003, 9 years later, a breakthrough finally came. Construction workers renovating an abandoned farmhouse 40 miles away discovered human remains buried in a dry well. DNA confirmed they belonged to David Miller. Soon after, a search of the property turned up more remains: Carol, Emily, and Jacob. The discovery stunned Maple Hollow. Forensics revealed they had died the night they vanished. They'd been taken from their home at gunpoint by someone they knew, driven to the farmhouse and killed execution style. The muddy boot print finally connected the dots. The rare boots were traced back to Rick Hanley, the disgruntled farmhand. His DNA matched evidence on the scarf. Rick was arrested and eventually confessed. He'd harbored a grudge against David for firing him and had meticulously planned the murders, locking the doors behind him to buy time. Rick Hanley was sentenced to life without parole. The trial shook Iowa, shattering the illusion of small-town safety. The Miller home was demolished at the family's request. A memorial garden stands there now, a quiet place with 4 benches, one for each family member. But locals still speak of the warm dinner mystery. For nearly a decade, it haunted their town, a symbol of unanswered questions and restless spirits. Let's move to our third story. The Harmony Street Murder, 1987. Harmony, Ohio, was the kind of suburban neighborhood immortalized in postcards and TV sitcoms. Tree-lined streets, pastel houses with white picket fences and front porches where neighbors shared lemonade. In the summer of 1987, it felt like the safest place in America. On July 18, 1987, 4 best friends, Megan Parker, 12, Sarah Collins, 12, Katie Miller, 13, and Amanda Ross, 12, gathered for a sleepover at Sarah's house on Harmony Street. The air was heavy with the hum of cicadas, and the scent of freshly mown lawns drifted through the open windows. The girls had planned a typical night: pizza, music videos on MTV, prank calls, and whispered secrets about school crushes. Sarah's parents were at a neighborhood barbecue down the street, promising to check in before midnight. By 10:30 p.m., they were restless. Katie suggested something more exciting than nail polish and Cyndi Lauper tapes. That's when Amanda brought up the old Holloway house, an abandoned 2-story home at the end of Harmony Street. The Holloway house had been empty for years, rumored to be haunted. Some said its last owner vanished without a trace. Others claimed they'd seen candles flickering in the windows. In reality, it was just a neglected rental, but to kids, it was the perfect backdrop for a spooky dare. Katie, the boldest of the group, dared Megan to sneak into the house and bring back proof: a photograph, a trinket, anything. Megan was hesitant but didn't want to seem like a coward. The 4 girls slipped on their sneakers, grabbed a flashlight, and crept out the back door. The Holloway house loomed at the end of the cul-de-sac, its broken shutters creaking in the summer breeze. A no trespassing sign hung crookedly on the front door. "Just go in and grab something," Katie whispered. Megan swallowed hard, took the flashlight, and slipped inside through a back door left ajar. The other girls giggled nervously outside, daring each other to follow. They didn't know they'd just made the worst mistake of their lives. The air inside was thick with mildew. Megan tiptoed through the dark hallway, the flashlight beam dancing across peeling wallpaper and overturned furniture. She thought she heard a floorboard creak upstairs, but told herself it was just the wind. In the living room, she spotted a dusty porcelain figurine on the mantelpiece. Perfect. She reached for it, then froze. A voice came from behind her, looking for something. Before she could scream, a hand clamped over her mouth. Outside, her friends grew impatient. Katie whispered, "She's taking forever." Amanda offered to go check, but Sarah, sensing something was wrong, urged them to wait. 10 minutes passed, then 20. By midnight, panic set in. The girls ran back to Sarah's house, sobbing. Sarah's parents returned to find 3 terrified children babbling about Megan being taken by someone in the dark. Police swarmed Harmony Street that night. Officers searched the Holloway house from top to bottom, but found no sign of Megan or her flashlight. The figurine she'd grabbed was lying broken on the floor. Neighbors joined the search, flashlights sweeping through yards and alleys. The town of Harmony had never experienced anything like this. Detectives interviewed the girls separately. Their stories were consistent. Megan had entered the house and they'd heard a noise, a door slamming, maybe footsteps, before everything went silent. By sunrise, the news vans arrived. Missing girl vanishes in abandoned house. The headlines read, parents kept their children indoors. Harmony Street, once a symbol of suburban bliss, was now a crime scene. A week later, police received an anonymous tip about a man living in a rundown RV park 5 miles from Harmony Street. His name was Dennis Hall, a 42-year-old drifter with a record of breaking and entering. Neighbors reported seeing him near the Holloway house multiple times. Detectives searched his RV and found a disturbing stash: children's clothing, Polaroids of local playgrounds, and a flashlight with a purple ribbon tied to its handle, the same ribbon Megan's mother had used to mark her flashlight. Dennis was arrested, but he denied involvement. The Holloway house was searched again, this time more thoroughly. In the basement, behind a false wall, they discovered a makeshift living space, a mattress, canned food, and a stack of newspapers. Dennis had been squatting there for months. Still, Megan was nowhere to be found. 2 months later, a hiker found human remains in a wooded area near an abandoned quarry. DNA confirmed what the town feared. It was Megan. The autopsy revealed she had died the same night she vanished. Dennis Hall was charged with kidnapping, assault, and murder. His trial became a media circus, with prosecutors describing him as a predator who had stalked Harmony Street like a hunter in a zoo. He was sentenced to life without parole. The Holloway house was demolished, replaced with a manicured park. But the tragedy left scars that no bulldozer could erase. For decades, locals avoided Harmony Street after dark. Parents warned their children never to take dares. Sarah, Katie, and Amanda grew up haunted by guilt. Katie, in particular, spiraled into depression, blaming herself for daring Megan to go inside. Each year on July 18th, neighbors gather at the small memorial park where the Holloway house once stood. They light candles and release balloons in Megan's memory. Some say they've seen a flashlight flicker near the park late at night, or heard the sound of a child's giggle carried on the wind. The Harmony Street murder became a cautionary tale for parents nationwide. News specials used it to warn against abandoned buildings, stranger danger, and unsupervised nights. But to those who lived it, it was more than a headline. It was the night their picture-perfect town lost its innocence. Story 4, Walt from Next Door. In the spring of 1999, Maple Creek, Wisconsin, looked like a slice of Americana frozen in time. Rows of pastel houses lined Maple Street. Kids rode bikes till dusk, and every front yard boasted a flagpole and a mailbox decorated with flowers. Among these idyllic homes lived Walt Jensen, a widower in his late 60s with a gentle voice and a habit of waving at every passing car. Walt had lived there for decades, raising 3 children with his late wife, Ruth. When Ruth died in '96, Walt became something of a neighborhood grandfather. He mowed the elderly widow's lawn next door, helped new couples fix leaky pipes, and dropped off zucchini bread at Christmas time. Parents trusted him. Kids loved him. Walt was safe, but Maple Creek was about to learn that sometimes the safest face is the most dangerous mask. On June 12, 1999, a 9-year-old girl named Amy Rivers vanished on her way home from a friend's house 3 blocks away. Her parents called the police within an hour. The entire town rallied to search. Neighbors combed the woods, Officers went door to door, and Walt was among the first to volunteer. He handed out flyers, walked the streets with a flashlight, and even baked cookies for exhausted officers. When days turned into weeks, Maple Creek grew anxious. Porch lights stayed on all night, and parents stopped letting kids play outside. Then in August, another girl, Lily Parker, 7 years old, disappeared from her own backyard. The similarities were too close to ignore. Maple Creek wasn't just unlucky, it had a predator. Police set up roadblocks and interviewed every resident. Walt, like everyone else, opened his door with a warm smile. He answered every question politely. Yes, he'd seen Lily playing, yes. He was home that night, no, he hadn't noticed anything suspicious. Detectives left with no reason to doubt him. After all, Walt was the heart of Maple Creek. He attended church every Sunday, donated to the local food bank, and fixed bikes for neighborhood kids. No one thought twice when he offered rides or handed out popsicles on hot days. But behind Walt's tidy home, in a locked shed he called his workshop, secrets festered. In September, Lily's backpack was discovered in a drainage ditch 20 miles away. Inside, police found a single fingerprint that didn't match any family member. The print was run through a state database. Days later, detectives got a hit. Walter Jensen, arrested in 1973 for indecent exposure, and again in 1975 for inappropriate contact with a child. Both charges had been dropped after plea deals and character testimony from his church. Detectives returned to Maple Creek, this time with a warrant. Walt seemed calm as they searched his house. Upstairs was immaculate, filled with family photos and Ruth's porcelain dolls. But when they opened the shed, the illusion shattered. Inside, investigators found a collection of horror: ropes, duct tape, a locked trunk containing children's clothing, Polaroids, and hand-drawn maps of local neighborhoods. The walls were lined with newspaper clippings of missing children cases spanning decades. Some victims were never identified. DNA analysis linked items in the shed to Amy Rivers and Lily Parker. Beneath a false floor panel, officers found human remains. The grandfatherly figure who baked cookies and waved at passing cars had been a serial predator for over 30 years. The arrest shook Maple Creek to its core. Walt was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 6 counts of kidnapping, and dozens of other charges tied to cold cases. During trial, prosecutors revealed that Walt had lured children with promises of candy or rides, earning their trust through years of community involvement. He'd carefully groomed an entire neighborhood, making himself untouchable. Neighbors who once adored him now testified in horror. One mother sobbed on the stand. "We thought he was safe. We trusted him with our babies." Walt showed no remorse. He sat stone-faced as photos of his victims were shown. In 2001, he was sentenced to life without parole. Maple Creek never recovered fully. Parents became hyper-vigilant, and the cheerful block parties that defined the town disappeared. Walt's house was demolished, replaced by a community park dedicated to his victims. Amy's and Lily's families moved away, unable to bear the memories. The case became a cautionary tale in law enforcement circles. Predators don't always fit the stranger danger stereotype. Sometimes they are the friendly neighbor who always waves, the man mowing your lawn, the person you trust with your children. Story 5, The Counselor's Secret. In 2004, Brookfield High School in rural Nebraska was a safe haven for its 600 students. The hallway smelled faintly of floor wax and cafeteria pizza. The trophy case gleamed with football victories, and the community prided itself on being one big family. At the center of that family was Mr. Richard "Rick" Lawson, the beloved school counselor. Rick was in his late 40s with graying hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a soft voice that calmed even the most anxious teenager. He'd been at Brookfield High for nearly 2 decades, guiding students through breakups, college applications, and family struggles. Parents adored him. Teachers leaned on him. Students poured their hearts out to him behind his office's closed door. Rick was the safe adult everyone told kids to talk to, and he used that trust like a weapon. The first whispers came from a shy sophomore named Emily Sanders. She confided in a friend that Mr. Lawson made her uncomfortable. He'd compliment her clothes too often or brush her shoulder when handing back papers. The friend dismissed it. "That's just Mr. Lawson. He's nice to everyone." Then came Samantha Reed, a junior who stopped going to Lawson's office despite struggling in school. When pressed, she said she didn't like being alone with him. Teachers chalked it up to teenage moodiness. Brookfield was the kind of town where bad things didn't happen. Rumors about Rick Lawson didn't fit the narrative. But behind his kind smile, Rick was carefully grooming vulnerable students. In May of 2005, a senior named Megan Curtis walked into the police station with her mother. Her voice trembled as she told officers that Lawson had been inappropriate with her for months. Comments about her body, long hugs, and escalating counseling sessions that blurred boundaries. Her mother, horrified, demanded action. At first, the school administration hesitated. Lawson had an impeccable reputation, but Megan's bravery inspired 2 more students to come forward, then 4 more. Within weeks, a pattern emerged. All of Lawson's victims were vulnerable, kids struggling with depression, family problems, or social isolation. He'd gain their trust, isolate them, and cross boundaries slowly so they doubted themselves. When police searched his home computer, they found explicit conversations with students, hidden folders of photos, and evidence he'd been grooming teens for years. On a sunny June morning, parents watched in shock as Lawson was led out of Brookfield High in handcuffs. Reporters descended on the small town, dubbing him the predator counselor. The trial revealed a chilling picture. Over a dozen victims, some dating back 10 years. Lawson had used his role to prey on those most in need of guidance, all while projecting the image of a compassionate mentor. Parents wept in the courtroom. Students testified through tears. The prosecutor described Lawson's office as a hunting ground disguised as a sanctuary. Brookfield was never the same. Parents felt betrayed. Teachers questioned every sign they'd ignored. Lawson's habit of locking his office door, his tendency to favor certain students, his late-night phone calls. The school district implemented sweeping reforms, mandatory open-door counseling policies, surveillance cameras in hallways, annual child protection training for staff. But for Megan and the other survivors, change came too late. Many suffered from PTSD, anxiety, and trust issues for years. In 2007, Rick Lawson was sentenced to 45 years in prison. He showed no remorse as the judge called him a wolf in a sheepdog's clothing. Brookfield High removed his photo from every yearbook and plaque. His office was gutted and converted into a student resource center, painted bright yellow, a symbolic reclamation of the space. But his name remained a scar on the community's memory. Today, Brookfield High is often cited in child safety seminars. Survivors like Megan speak publicly about grooming, helping other students spot warning signs. Your video could show a slow pan of an empty school hallway, a closed office door with a nameplate removed, a narrator's whisper. He was the man everyone trusted, and that's why no one saw it coming. Story 6, Room 312 Ritual. The Eldridge Hotel in Blackwater, West Virginia, was a relic of another era. Built in 1894, its brick facade and wrought iron balconies whispered stories of oil barons, traveling salesmen, and soldiers passing through during wartime. Locals claimed the hotel was haunted, though no one could quite agree on by whom. Room 312 was said to be the epicenter of the activity. Guests reported strange knocking at night, mirrors fogging over with handprints, and the sensation of being watched. Some claimed to wake up with scratches on their arms. By 2015, the hotel leaned into its reputation, offering haunted tours every October. That's how Dr. Nathan Cole, a respected historian and author, found himself booking a week-long stay. He wasn't a thrill seeker, he was a researcher. Known for his best-selling books on occult traditions, Cole had spent years studying the Eldridge Hotel's grim history, convinced Room 312 held more than just ghost stories. Dr. Cole was 47, tall and reserved, with wire-frame glasses and a meticulous nature. He taught history at a prestigious East Coast university, but left academia to focus on field research. His latest book explored ritual spaces, locations imbued with layers of spiritual and emotional energy over centuries. In his journal, later retrieved by investigators, Cole wrote, 312 is not just haunted, it's a locus. I believe rituals were performed here long before this was a hotel. Something is bound to this space. I intend to prove it. He checked into the Eldridge on October 15, 2015, carrying only a duffel bag, a tripod camera, and several boxes of old manuscripts. Hotel staff remembered him as polite but distant. He rarely left his room. Cole spent his first 3 nights recording every sound, flicker, and temperature change in Room 312. His journal notes grew increasingly frantic. Night 1, knocking at 3:12 a.m., faint chanting. No other guests on floor. Night 2, found symbols carved into the wardrobe, older than hotel construction. Night 3, dreamt of a man in a plague doctor's mask standing over me. Woke to find the window open. He became obsessed with an ancient map of Blackwater that showed a church once stood on the hotel's foundation. Local archives confirmed the church burned down in 1812 after a mysterious fire that killed 13 congregants during a midnight service. On October 19, Cole's demeanor changed. Staff recalled him pacing in the lobby, muttering Latin phrases. He returned to Room 312 carrying a wooden box filled with candles, chalk, and ritual objects. That night, guests on the floor below reported strange smells, burnt herbs and iron. Others heard chanting. Cole had drawn a massive symbol on the floor in white chalk, a sigil copied from one of his manuscripts. He set up his camera and began what he called a banishing ritual. In his final journal entry, scrawled hours before dawn, he wrote, "The energy here is suffocating. I can feel them pressing against the veil. If I can sever their connection, this place will be free. I'm not sure I will be." At 6:47 a.m., hotel staff unlocked Room 312 after guests complained of smoke alarms going off. What they found would haunt them forever. Cole was dead, lying inside a chalk circle with a ceremonial dagger through his chest. Candles flickered around him, wax pooling on the hardwood floor. The mirrors in the room were shattered, and Latin phrases were smeared across the walls in ash. His camera, still recording, captured hours of chanting, whispers, and at one point, what sounded like knocking from inside the closet. In the final minutes of the footage, Cole stared directly into the lens and whispered, "It's not leaving, neither am I." The screen went black seconds later. Authorities ruled the death a suicide. There were no signs of forced entry, and the dagger bore only Cole's fingerprints. His family was devastated but not surprised. He'd always been drawn to dark things. His sister told reporters. Paranormal investigators swarmed the hotel, some convinced Cole had opened a portal. Guests claimed the activity in room 312 intensified. Objects moved on their own. The smell of smoke lingered, and some swore they saw Cole's reflection in the broken mirror shards. The Eldridge closed room 312 to the public, but word spread quickly. It became a pilgrimage site for occult enthusiasts who left offerings and candles outside the locked door. Cole's unfinished manuscript was later published posthumously under the title The Veil at Blackwater. In it, he theorized that buildings could act as psychic batteries, charging over centuries of trauma until they became sentient spaces. The book became a bestseller, cementing his legend. The Eldridge Hotel, now a full-fledged paranormal tourist attraction, features a plaque honoring him. The hallway outside room 312 is lined with fan mail and photos from visitors hoping to glimpse the historian's ghost. Hotel staff claim that every October, around the anniversary of his death, the smoke alarms in room 312 go off at exactly 6:47 a.m., the time his body was discovered. Story 7, The Willowbrook Lineage. In 2012, Clara Whitman, a 33-year-old genealogist from Boston, thought she was embarking on a simple family history project. Her grandmother, Edith Whitman, had grown up in the tiny farming town of Willowbrook, Kentucky, a place Clara had only visited once as a child. The project started with a dusty shoebox of black and white photos and brittle letters, all carefully saved by Edith. Clara's plan was to create a family tree as a gift for her grandmother's 90th birthday. She'd always been fascinated by ancestry. Uncovering family lore was her passion, but she never expected that mapping her roots would lead her to a legacy soaked in blood. Willowbrook was picturesque, rolling hills, tobacco barns, and a single main street where time seemed to move slowly. But beneath the charm lay a dark history, one the town preferred to forget. The first clue came from a faded photo tucked in an envelope marked J.T. 1887. It showed a man in his mid-30s with piercing eyes and a crooked smile standing beside a farmhouse. Clara's grandmother had never mentioned him. Clara dug through census records and discovered his name, Jonah Thomas Whitman, her great-great-grandfather. Oddly, records of him stopped abruptly in 1892. No death certificate, no obituary. Curiosity turned into obsession. Clara searched local archives and unearthed a chilling headline from 1893. Willowbrook farmer suspected in disappearances. Jonah Whitman, it turned out, had been accused of murdering at least 3 farmhands and possibly more. Bodies were never recovered. He was never arrested. By 1894, Jonah himself vanished. Clara visited Willowbrook for the first time in decades. She checked into a roadside motel and drove to the local library where the elderly librarian, Mrs. Langley, remembered whispers about Jonah Whitman. He was different, Langley said softly, kept to himself. Folks said his land was cursed. Children went missing, animals too. Then one day he just disappeared. Some say he skipped town. Others say the town dealt with him themselves. Clara's hands shook as she paged through more newspapers. Rumors painted Jonah as a violent recluse, but there were no trial records. It was as if Willowbrook had collectively erased him. Determined to find answers, Clara located Jonah's farm, a crumbling, overgrown property deep in the woods. The farmhouse was long gone, but the foundation remained, covered in vines. While exploring, Clara found something that made her stomach drop, an old stone well sealed with rusted iron bars. Local records confirmed that the farm had been abandoned since Jonah's disappearance. That night, Clara stayed at the motel, unable to sleep. She kept picturing that well, wondering if it held the answers the town had buried. Clara contacted a friend in law enforcement, convincing him to accompany her to the farm. With his help, they obtained permission to excavate the site. 2 days later, cadaver dogs alerted near the well. Authorities pried off the rusted grate and lowered cameras. What they found shocked the entire county. Skeletal remains of at least 5 people, dating back more than a century. Forensic anthropologists confirmed the bones belonged to adults and children, all murdered around the time Jonah lived on the farm. The discovery made national headlines. Genealogist uncovers serial killer ancestor in Kentucky. As forensic teams worked, Clara uncovered Jonah's journals in the attic of her grandmother's house. Written in faded ink, they revealed a deeply disturbed man. Jonah believed he was cursed, claiming voices in the woods told him to cleanse the land. He wrote about burying trespassers who tainted the soil. Some entries suggested he targeted not just strangers but local children. The final entry, dated 1894, read, "They know. I see them watching from the trees. Tonight the curse will end." Jonah vanished shortly after writing that. Many historians now believe Willowbrook's townsfolk killed him and sealed the well to hide the truth. Clara's discovery devastated her grandmother. Edith, once proud of her Kentucky heritage, fell into silence. She refused to speak to reporters and asked Clara never to mention Jonah again. Other relatives accused Clara of digging up skeletons best left buried. The Whitman family fractured under the weight of its dark legacy, but Clara refused to let Jonah's victims be forgotten. She worked with local authorities to create a memorial on the old farm site. Today, a small garden and plaque honor the unnamed lives lost to a man the town tried to erase. Willowbrook residents whisper that Jonah's ghost still haunts the woods. Hikers report hearing whispers near the well, or seeing a man in suspenders standing at the tree line, watching silently. The farm became a destination for paranormal enthusiasts. Some claim their cameras malfunctioned near the foundation, and others say they've recorded faint children's laughter. Story 8, The Sheriff's Son. In the early 1990s, Cedar Falls, Montana was a postcard-perfect small town. Nestled between pine-covered hills, its population of 3,000 prided itself on neighborly values and a deep respect for law enforcement. At the center of that respect stood Sheriff Allen Whitaker, a towering man with a calm demeanor and decades of service. Whitaker was more than a sheriff. He was a symbol of stability. He'd coached Little League, led holiday parades, and delivered groceries to widows during harsh winters. His son, Ethan Whitaker, grew up with that same trust. By 21, Ethan was seen as a golden boy, handsome, charming, and untouchable. But that trust would be shattered one summer night, revealing a darkness no one wanted to believe could come from the sheriff's own home. In June 1993, Ethan started dating Rachel Dunn, a bright and outspoken 19-year-old waitress at the local diner. Rachel came from a working-class family and had dreams of leaving Cedar Falls for college. To outsiders, their relationship seemed like a small-town fairy tale, the sheriff's son and the pretty waitress. But behind closed doors, their romance was toxic. Friends later testified that Ethan was controlling and jealous, constantly checking Rachel's whereabouts. He'd show up at her job unannounced, glaring at customers who flirted with her. Rachel confided to her best friend that she wanted to break up but feared Ethan's temper and his father's influence. In Cedar Falls, crossing the Whitakers wasn't wise. On August 14, 1993, Rachel was last seen leaving the diner after her shift. She never made it home. Rachel's disappearance rocked Cedar Falls. Her car was found parked behind the diner, keys in the ignition, purse on the passenger seat. There were no signs of struggle. Sheriff Whitaker personally led the investigation. Officers canvassed neighborhoods, interviewed customers, and searched the surrounding woods. For weeks, volunteers combed through brush and riverbanks. But behind the scenes, something was off. Rachel's friends claimed she'd confided about Ethan's abuse, yet deputies didn't formally interview him for days. When they finally did, Ethan said he'd been home playing video games the night she vanished. His father confirmed his alibi. The case stalled. Rumors spread, but no arrests were made. Cedar Falls began to quietly accept that Rachel was gone. Another tragic, unsolved mystery. Nearly a year later, in July 1994, hikers stumbled upon human remains in a ravine 10 miles outside town. The coroner confirmed they belonged to Rachel. She'd been shot twice in the chest and hastily buried under brush. The discovery reignited the investigation, and whispers grew louder. Ethan was the prime suspect. Locals remembered seeing his truck near the ravine. A former deputy anonymously told reporters he'd been ordered to back off, questioning Ethan early in the case. Pressure mounted, and the Montana State Police stepped in. Forensic analysis revealed tire tracks near the scene matched Ethan's truck. A bullet recovered from Rachel's body matched a gun registered to Sheriff Whitaker. The evidence was damning, but Ethan wasn't arrested. The arrest finally came in 1996, after 2 years of investigative roadblocks. Ethan was charged with first-degree murder. The trial was a media spectacle. Reporters descended on Cedar Falls, eager to cover the sheriff's son scandal. Prosecutors painted Ethan as a violent, entitled young man who believed his father's badge made him untouchable. Witnesses testified to his obsession with Rachel. The state argued that after she tried to break up with him, Ethan lured her to the ravine and killed her in a fit of rage. Sheriff Whitaker testified in his son's defense, insisting Ethan had been home. But cracks in his credibility showed. Deputies admitted they'd been discouraged from investigating Ethan, and evidence logs had gone missing in the sheriff's office. The jury deliberated for 3 days before delivering a verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. Ethan was sentenced to 40 years in prison. The trial destroyed Cedar Falls' trust in law enforcement. Sheriff Whitaker resigned in disgrace, accused of obstructing justice. Though never formally charged, he lived out his final years under a cloud of suspicion. Rachel's parents moved away, unable to bear the stares and whispers. They started a foundation in her name, advocating for victims of domestic violence. The Whitaker home was abandoned, its windows boarded up. Locals whispered it was cursed. Teenagers dared each other to knock on the door at night. Ethan remains in prison today, his parole denied multiple times. In interviews, he maintains his innocence, claiming the trial was a witch hunt, but the evidence tells a different story. A young woman's life stolen, and a town forced to confront the fact that evil can hide behind even the most trusted badge. Story 9, buried in Grandma's garden. The Dunmore family home sat at the end of Cedar Lane in rural Indiana, a modest one-story house with pastel shutters and a garden overflowing with daisies and roses. It had belonged to Margaret Maggie Dunmore, a sweet, silver-haired grandmother who baked pies for neighbors and volunteered at the church pantry. After Maggie's passing in 2017, the house was inherited by her granddaughter Laura Whitfield, 28, who had fond memories of spending summers there as a child. The place was old but charming, with creaky floors and a sprawling backyard. Laura moved in with her boyfriend Tyler Reed, 30, hoping for a fresh start after a rocky patch in their relationship. At first, things seemed idyllic. Laura spent weekends tending her grandmother's flowers, trying to bring life back to the neglected garden. But behind the white picket fence and cheerful blooms, trouble was brewing. Tyler was volatile, jealous, and prone to anger. Friends noticed bruises on Laura's arms, which she brushed off as accidents. She became quieter, less social, and co-workers later admitted they feared for her safety. The tension escalated in August 2019, when Laura stopped showing up to work altogether. Her family thought she was overwhelmed with grief over her grandmother's passing and adjusting to a new life. But weeks passed with no word. And then, her sister made a disturbing observation. Every time she stopped by the house, Tyler answered the door. Laura was never home. By September, Laura's family filed a missing person report. Tyler insisted she'd run off to clear her head and claimed she was staying with friends. He even showed them text messages from Laura's phone. But something felt wrong. Laura adored her family. Disappearing without telling her sister or her beloved niece didn't make sense. Police conducted a welfare check but found nothing suspicious at first glance. Tyler was cooperative, calm, and polite, charming even. He claimed Laura struggled with depression and needed space. He even offered to help put up missing posters. As the weeks dragged on, investigators noticed cracks in his story. Security footage from a local gas station showed Tyler alone in Laura's car days after she disappeared. Witnesses claimed to hear shouting from the house late at night. Still, there was no sign of Laura. The search widened to nearby parks, abandoned lots, and lakes. Volunteers combed fields, but leads dried up. The Dunmore home, once filled with warmth, was now a place of whispered suspicion. In October, a neighbor approached police with a tip. They'd seen Tyler digging in the backyard late one night, long after Laura's disappearance. At first, detectives assumed he was working on the garden. After all, Maggie had been a passionate gardener, and Tyler might have been continuing her tradition. But the timing nagged at them. They returned with a warrant and began a search. Officers walked through the yard, taking note of newly turned soil near the flower beds. Dogs were brought in, and within minutes one of them sat down, alerting its handler. The air grew heavy as investigators began digging. 2 feet down, they hit something soft. A strong odor confirmed their worst fear. They'd found a body. Laura had been buried beneath her grandmother's beloved roses, wrapped in a bedsheet. Forensic evidence revealed blunt force trauma to the head. Tyler was arrested that evening. Under interrogation, his calm demeanor cracked. He admitted to hitting Laura during an argument but claimed it was an accident. He buried her in the garden because he panicked. Further investigation revealed the texts Tyler showed Laura's family had been sent from her phone after she was dead. He'd used them to create the illusion she was alive and well. The community was horrified. The quaint home with its white picket fence became a crime scene swarming with reporters. Maggie's garden, once a symbol of love, was now synonymous with tragedy. Tyler's trial in 2020 exposed a history of domestic abuse. Friends testified about bruises, threats, and Laura's growing fear of him. Prosecutors painted him as a manipulative and dangerous man who believed he could cover up his crime in plain sight. The defense argued it was a moment of passion gone wrong, but the jury was unconvinced. Tyler was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Laura's sister spoke at sentencing. You buried her where she felt safest, in Grandma's garden. You turned love into horror, but you didn't bury her spirit. We'll speak her name forever. The Dunmore home was eventually sold, but locals say no one stays long. The new owners tore out the flower beds, but visitors still leave bouquets at the edge of the yard. Laura's family started a foundation to support domestic violence victims, using her story to help others escape abusive relationships. Her favorite roses now grow in a memorial garden at the local women's shelter, blooming as a reminder of resilience. Story 10, The Merchant's Resurrection. In 1693, a wealthy merchant in colonial Massachusetts sought immortality. He found something worse. The embers of the Salem witch trials still glowed in Massachusetts Bay Colony. Though the frenzy had faded, fear of the supernatural lingered in every church pew and cobblestone alley. In Thornfield, a bustling port town 30 miles from Salem, merchants grew rich off trade, but whispers of curses and omens haunted taverns. Among Thornfield's elite was Nathaniel Barrow, a 48-year-old shipping magnate with a sharp wit and ruthless ambition. He owned half the docks, imported fine silks from Europe, and was feared as much as he was respected. But Nathaniel's wealth couldn't stop the slow decay of his. In 1692, Nathaniel fell gravely ill with what doctors called consumption. Physicians bled him, leeches drained him, and ministers prayed over him, but nothing eased his suffering. Obsessed with his own mortality, Nathaniel began seeking out alchemists, mystics, and anyone claiming knowledge of the occult. He became fixated on a rumor, an ancient ritual practiced in Europe that could preserve the soul within the body beyond death. It was said to require a coffin sealed in iron, a burial chamber lined with mirrors, and an invocation spoken at the moment of passing. Nathaniel traveled to Boston under the guise of business and met Dr. Erasmus Finch, a disgraced physician rumored to dabble in forbidden arts. Finch agreed to teach him the ritual at a price. Nathaniel paid in gold and promised Finch a share of his fortune should the resurrection succeed. Back in Thornfield, Nathaniel commissioned an elaborate crypt beneath the family estate. Craftsmen worked under strict orders, carving symbols into the stone walls, unaware of their meaning. Mirrors imported from Venice were mounted inside the tomb, and a custom coffin of oak and iron was built, lined with velvet and engraved sigils. On a bitter January night in 1693, Nathaniel succumbed to his illness. His body was prepared by Finch himself, who performed the ritual in secret. Witnesses reported hearing Latin chants and smelling incense as the coffin was lowered into the crypt. Nathaniel's funeral was lavish, attended by ministers and merchants alike. None knew that Finch had whispered a final invocation as the tomb was sealed. In darkness, wake. In shadow, breathe. Weeks later, strange events began at the Barrow estate. Servants reported hearing knocking from beneath the house. Dogs refused to go near the crypt. One maid claimed to see Nathaniel's face in the window of his study, though the room had been locked since his death. Finch dismissed the servants' fears, insisting the sounds were settling earth. But he knew the ritual was working. On a foggy March evening, a fisherman swore he saw Nathaniel standing by the docks, wearing his burial clothes. The man fled in terror, and rumors spread quickly. Soon, half the town believed Nathaniel had returned from the grave. Ministers denounced the sightings as devilish illusions, but others whispered that Nathaniel had cheated death. The Barrow estate became a place of dread. Nathaniel's widow, Elizabeth Barrow, refused to enter the crypt. She claimed she heard scratching from beneath the floorboards at night, followed by faint whispers calling her name. One evening, she awoke to find muddy footprints leading from her bedroom door to her bedside. Elizabeth fled Thornfield, leaving the estate in Finch's care. The mansion fell into disrepair, and locals avoided the property entirely. In April 1694, townspeople demanded the crypt be opened to quell rumors. Finch reluctantly agreed, leading a group of ministers and constables into the burial chamber. When they pried open the iron coffin, they found claw marks etched into the velvet lining and bloodied fingernails embedded in the wood. Nathaniel's face was twisted in terror, his mouth open in a silent scream. The coffin was resealed, and Finch ordered the crypt sealed with lead. He claimed Nathaniel had suffered from premature burial, not black magic. Few believed him. After the crypt was sealed, misfortune plagued Thornfield. Ships owned by the Barrow family sank in storms. Fires destroyed warehouses. A sickness swept through the docks, killing dozens. Some blamed Finch. Others claimed Nathaniel's spirit was exacting revenge. Local clergy performed exorcisms, but strange occurrences persisted. Children claimed to see a man with glowing eyes in alleyways. Merchants awoke to find their ledgers rearranged, as if someone had been reading them. Horses bolted when passing the Barrow estate. By 1696, Dr. Finch had descended into paranoia. He was found dead in his study, surrounded by occult manuscripts. His journals revealed his greatest fear, that Nathaniel's soul had not passed peacefully, but had been bound to flesh beyond its time, turning him into a restless revenant. Finch's death only fueled the legend. Thornfield residents abandoned the Barrow estate entirely. In 1710, a group of men attempted to loot the crypt, hoping to steal Nathaniel's rumored fortune. When they broke through the lead seal, they found the coffin empty. The men fled in terror, and the crypt was bricked shut again. No one dared to investigate further. Nathaniel's body was never seen again, but sightings of a tall man in tattered burial clothes persisted for decades. In 1923, a group of historians excavated the ruins, hoping to study Thornfield's colonial history. They uncovered the entrance to the crypt, its bricks blackened and crumbling. Inside, they found the coffin's lid splintered, claw marks gouged deep into the stone floor, and a single iron ring. A restraint Finch had apparently installed after Nathaniel's burial. 2 workers quit on the spot, claiming they heard whispers in the chamber. The crypt was resealed, and artifacts were sent to a Boston museum. In 1931, the museum displayed Nathaniel's signet ring and a fragment of the coffin. Visitors reported a cold spot near the exhibit and said the glass case sometimes fogged over as if someone breathed on it. One night, a guard claimed to see a man in colonial clothing standing by the display. The next morning, the fragment of coffin wood was missing. It was never recovered. Today, Thornfield is a ghost town, visited mostly by paranormal investigators. The ruins of the Barrow estate are overgrown, but locals warn tourists not to linger after dark. Some say Nathaniel's spirit never left the land he built his empire on, and others believe he still walks the shore, cursed by his own greed and hubris. Ghost hunters have captured EVPs near the crypt, including a chilling whisper. "Let me out." Story 11. Camp Scott Murders, 1977. 3 young Girl Scouts went to summer camp for the first time. They never came home. In the summer of 1977, Camp Scott, a beloved Girl Scout camp near Locust Grove, Oklahoma, prepared to welcome 140 girls for 2 weeks of adventure. The camp had operated for decades without incident. Nestled in dense woods, its rustic cabins, dirt trails, and open-air tents embodied the ideal summer escape. On June 12, excited campers arrived in buses, singing songs and clutching sleeping bags. Among them were Lori Farmer 8, the youngest in her troop, shy and sweet; Michelle Guse 9, a bookish, curious girl; Doris Denise Milner 10, outgoing, excited for her first night away from home. The girls were assigned to tent #8 in the Kiowa unit, the farthest from the counselor's tent and partially hidden by trees. Before campers arrived, staff had discovered disturbing signs. Days earlier, a counselor found an abandoned box of donuts and a handwritten note in a camp building. "We are on a mission to kill 3 girls in tent #1. Staff dismissed it as a cruel prank and didn't report it to police. On the night of June 12, heavy rain pounded the camp. Counselors scrambled to settle the girls in their tents. By 10 p.m., the Kiowa unit was quiet except for the storm and occasional laughter from the girls. At dawn on June 13, a counselor walking to the showers made a horrifying discovery. 3 small sleeping bags laid side by side near a trail. Inside were the bodies of Lori, Michelle, and Denise. They had been beaten, sexually assaulted, and strangled. The brutality shocked even veteran investigators. Campers were quickly evacuated. Parents were called in tears. By noon, Camp Scott was swarming with police. Investigators found a crowbar and flashlight near the crime scene, a footprint in blood on a tent wall, duct tape and rope believed to have been used in the attack, a boot print matching a military-style shoe. The girls' tent flap had been cut open. None of the other 130 campers heard the attack over the rainstorm. The camp closed immediately and has never reopened. Attention quickly turned to Jean Leroy Hart, a 33-year-old Cherokee man who had escaped from jail in 1973. Hart had been convicted of kidnapping and raping 2 pregnant women and was considered extremely dangerous. Hart had grown up just a mile from Camp Scott and knew the area well. He'd evaded authorities for 4 years, hiding in the Cherokee Nation community. Locals viewed Hart as a folk hero, believing his earlier convictions were unjust. A massive manhunt ensued, involving FBI agents, state troopers, and tribal police. Search teams combed caves and abandoned buildings. The heavily forested area made tracking Hart difficult, and many in the Cherokee community refused to cooperate. Newspapers sensationalized the case, describing Hart as a phantom in the woods. Parents pulled their children from scouting programs statewide. On April 6, 1978, after months of searching, Hart was captured without incident at a friend's home. He was calm, polite, and said nothing about the murders. Prosecutors were confident. Hair samples, fingerprints, and other forensic evidence tied Hart to the crime scene. Hart's trial began in March 1979. The courtroom overflowed with reporters and supporters from both sides. The prosecution presented DNA evidence linking Hart to semen found on one of the girls, a pioneering use of genetic testing at the time. However, Hart's defense argued the forensic evidence was mishandled. The investigation was biased, and the community had scapegoated him. The trial lasted 6 weeks. On March 30, 1979, the jury acquitted Hart of all charges related to the murders. Hart returned to prison to serve time for his earlier crimes. 2 months later, he suffered a fatal heart attack at age 35. The murders of Lori, Michelle, and Denise remained officially unsolved, though many investigators believed Hart was guilty. DNA testing in the early 2000s suggested Hart was 1 in 700 possible matches for evidence, but not definitive proof. Camp Scott never reopened. The land was returned to the Cherokee Nation, but the abandoned camp quickly became overgrown. Tents rotted, cabins collapsed, and the once lively trails grew silent. Today, the camp is considered haunted. Urban explorers report hearing children's laughter and screams in the woods. The families of Lori, Michelle, and Denise never stopped seeking justice. Denise's mother became an outspoken advocate for victims' rights, often criticizing investigators for mishandling evidence and ignoring the warning note. The tragedy also changed Girl Scout safety standards nationwide. Camps were restructured, and background checks for staff became mandatory. Hart's trial left a deep divide in Oklahoma. Many in the Cherokee Nation believed Hart was innocent, a victim of systemic racism. Others were convinced he was guilty, pointing to his violent past and forensic evidence. The case became a symbol of mistrust between law enforcement and indigenous communities. Locals claim the camp is cursed. Campers who visited before 1977 remember feeling uneasy in the Kiowa unit, as if something watched from the woods. Ghost hunters say their equipment malfunctions near tent #8 remains. Some claim to see 3 small figures standing by the trail at dawn, their silhouettes outlined in mist. In 2022, the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation reopened the case, hoping modern DNA testing could definitively solve it. Advances in genealogy databases offer hope, but as of now, no one has been charged. Detectives say they are closer than ever, But time is their enemy. Many witnesses have died and evidence has degraded. Today, a small memorial stands where tent #8 once stood. Families visit each year, leaving stuffed animals, flowers, and handwritten letters. The tragedy remains one of Oklahoma's darkest chapters, a reminder that evil can strike even the most innocent places.